Please note, this episode includes an AI guest host. Some responses have been generated by artificial intelligence.
You've tuned into AI Innovations Unleashed, the podcast where we explore the future of artificial intelligence and the present awkwardness of Dr. JR trying to pronounce algorithmic bias without looking at notes. And here's today's joke to get you through until next week. Bias in AI? Shocking. Who would have guessed that teaching a robot using the internet would lead to some questionable results? Next, you'll tell me water is wet.
Aw, you're too kind, Nix. Okay, well, welcome to AI Innovations Unleashed, where AI meets the real world. Each week, we dive into how artificial intelligence is changing work, life, and everything in between. But before we get into today's topic, let me set the scene. It was recently Mother's Day. You're sitting in a sunlit kitchen, maybe helping slice fruit for brunch, or wrangling the kids into something resembling decent behavior. There's warmth in the air, and not just from the oven. It's a day that reminds us of fairness, intuition, and care. But what if I told you that somewhere an algorithm is making a decision that could affect your child's future education, your own chance at a new job, or whether you get approved for a loan, and it's doing so without any of the same care or fairness? Today's episode is about those unseen forces, algorithms and artificial intelligence systems that are shaping more of our world than we may realize, and doing it with all of our human baggage baked in. We're asking a critical question. Can AI be biased? And if it can, what do we do about it? But before we dig into the ethics, let's rewind a bit for those of you just joining us. In episode 1, we kicked off the series on May Day, fittingly talking about AI and the future of work. We broke down what artificial intelligence really is. No Hollywood robots, just a lot of math, patterns, and data. Think of AI as a super fast intern who never sleeps, crunching numbers and spotting trends to help humans make better decisions. Then, in episode number 2, we got a little chatty in honor of Star Wars Day, exploring how AI actually talks to us. We looked under the hood of chatbots, voice assistants, and large language models. Yes, the same kind that you will be listening to right now. We also had some fun with sci-fi tropes and listener stories about smart speakers acting a little not so smart. Now, here in episode 3, we're taking a more thoughtful turn, because while it's fun to ask whether AI can talk like us, we have to also ask, can it judge us? Can it make decisions about us fairly? That's why today, we're not just talking about tech, we're talking about ethics. It's a story with real consequences, but also with one of hope, because people are stepping up to make things better. To help us unpack this complicated, fascinating issue, I'm joined once again by AI ethics researcher and fellow truth seeker, Casey Brightman. Casey, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, JR. Always happy to nerd out on AI with you, especially when we're tackling something as important and misunderstood as algorithmic bias.
I know, right? Because a lot of people assume computers are objective, cold, logical, impartial. But once you start digging into how these systems are trained, you find a very different story.
Exactly. That's where we need to introduce some key terms to really understand the problem. Let's start with the word algorithm. Think of it like a recipe. It's a set of instructions a computer follows to make a decision or prediction. But unlike your grandma's chocolate chip cookies, this recipe doesn't always turn out delicious. If the ingredients, the data, are flawed, the result can be pretty sour.
Great analogy. And then that brings us to bias. We don't mean it in the emotional sense, like a person who prefers chocolate over vanilla. In AI, bias refers to systemic errors that cause unfair outcomes. For example, if an AI system is more likely to flag loan applications from women as risky, even when they have the same credit profile as men, that's algorithmic bias.
Bias can sneak in from several directions. There's data bias, which happens when the historical data we feed into the system reflects discrimination or inequality. Then there's labeling bias, which can come from how humans classify data. For example, whether someone tags certain resumes as qualified based on assumptions. And finally, there's design bias, choices made by developers during the creation of the algorithm that can unintentionally favor certain groups over others.
Okay, let's help them out. Let's bring this to life with a story. Say a company wants to streamline its hiring process using AI. They train the system on 10 years of resumes from past successful hires. Sounds smart, right?
Right? But here's the trap. If most of those past hires were men, the AI might learn that male candidates are more successful. That's what happened with Amazon's now abandoned recruiting tool. It ended up penalizing resumes that included the word women's, like Women's Chess Club, simply because they didn't match the male-dominated patterns it saw in the past.
So it's not the AI being sexist, it's just echoing the past. And of course, the past wasn't always fair.
Exactly. And that's why bias matters so much. These systems are being used to make real-life decisions in hiring, policing, loan approvals, even healthcare. If we don't correct the bias, we risk reinforcing the very inequalities we hope to fix.
And that's where we hit this other term, training data. For folks new to this, think of it like a big scrapbook of examples that the AI studies to learn how to do its job. If you wanted to recognize cats, you show it thousands of pictures labeled cat. But if your scrapbook is 90% orange tabbies, the AI might not recognize a Siamese cat.
And the same principle applies to people. If the data skews toward one race, gender, or region, the results will skew too. That's why diverse, representative data sets are so important. Without them, we're just teaching machines to replicate and even amplify our worst habits.
So, what do we do? Can we even fight bias in AI?
We can. And we are. For starters, more organizations are running bias audits, which are like health checkups for algorithms. They test whether the system treats different groups fairly. There's also a big movement toward explainable AI, where algorithms are designed to show their reasoning, kind of like when a teacher asks you to show your work in math class. That transparency helps catch problems early.
I love that metaphor, turning the black box into a glass box.
Exactly. And we're seeing more fairness-aware machine learning too, where the AI is programmed with constraints that prevent it from making decisions that disproportionately impact certain groups. It's a work in progress, but it shows that we don't have to accept biased AI as inevitable.
And ultimately, that's the big idea. AI isn't neutral. It's a reflection of us. If we want it to be fair, we have to make it fair. That means holding up a mirror not just to our tech, but to ourselves. So the next big question is, if we know bias is baked into some of these systems, what are we doing about it? Because understanding the problem is only half the battle. The real change comes from how we respond.
Right? And the good news is, we are responding. In fact, we're seeing a kind of global awakening when it comes to AI ethics. Governments, researchers, and businesses are all starting to realize that AI doesn't just need to be powerful, it needs to be responsible.
Let's start with what's happening right now. You mentioned earlier that DeepMind's new Gemini model is under scrutiny, not just for performance, but for fairness.
Exactly. DeepMind and others are now building fairness testing directly into the model development process. That means they're testing to make sure the model doesn't discriminate based on race, gender, or geography before it's released. And over in Europe, we've got the EU AI Act, which is one of the most comprehensive efforts yet to regulate AI. It specifically targets high-risk uses like biometric surveillance, hiring tools, and credit scoring, and requires that companies provide transparency, human oversight, and bias mitigation strategies.
And that's a huge shift. And here in the US, we've seen New York City pass Local Law 144, requiring that companies audit their hiring algorithms for bias and disclose when AI is used to screen job applicants. That's a pretty big leap toward accountability, especially for large employers.
Yes, and this affects small businesses too. A lot of startups and mid-sized companies use third-party HR platforms or marketing tools that include embedded AI. Those tools can unintentionally pass on biased decisions without the business even realizing it. That's why transparency and third-party audits are becoming essential, not just for tech giants, but for companies of every size.
So, whether you're a Fortune 500 or a local cafe using AI to screen resumes, you are part of this ecosystem.
Exactly. And academics are helping drive this transformation. Institutions like MIT, Stanford, and Oxford are leading major research into fairness-aware algorithms, data documentation standards, and algorithmic accountability. The AI Now Institute at NYU is especially vocal about the need for government regulation and public input. They've been pushing for ethical AI across law enforcement, labor, and education sectors.
And then on the industry side, we've got Microsoft, Google, and IBM all creating internal responsible AI teams. They're not perfect, but the fact that these companies are investing in ethics as a product feature is a big shift.
It really is. And looking toward the future, a lot of ideas are being brainstormed. We're talking about things like algorithmic nutrition labels, clear disclosures that show you what data was used, what risks exist, and how an AI system has been evaluated. Think of it like the label on your cereal box, but for the algorithm that's about to rank your job application.
I love that. Something understandable that says, hey, this AI was trained on these datasets. It's been checked for these issues. Here's where it might still struggle.
And beyond that, there's growing interest in participatory AI design. That means involving the people affected by these systems, especially marginalized groups, in their creation and oversight. The idea is, if a tool is going to make decisions about you, you should have a voice in how it's built.
That would be a radical and much needed shift. Less move fast and break things, more build thoughtfully and include people.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, the future of AI shouldn't just be about what's possible, it should be about what's right.
And just so all of our listeners know, this isn't just a US or European conversation. Countries around the world are rolling up their sleeves and getting involved in shaping the future of ethical AI.
Definitely. Let's spotlight a few international efforts that are really worth watching. First up is India's National Strategy for Artificial Intelligence, often nicknamed AI for All. India's approach is focused on inclusion, using AI to address challenges in agriculture, healthcare, education, and smart cities. What's really forward-thinking is that they emphasize ethical AI as a foundational pillar. They're investing in building unbiased data sets that reflect the country's massive linguistic, cultural, and economic diversity. It's a great example of tailoring AI development to local context instead of just importing models from the West.
That's powerful, especially for a country with over 1 billion people. Designing AI for equity at that scale isn't easy, but it sets a tone for how this tech can be used to lift everybody up.
Exactly. And then there's UNESCO's recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence, which is one of the first global frameworks adopted by nearly 200 countries. It's not legally binding, but it's a moral blueprint. It calls for transparency, privacy protections, and respect for human rights. One of the coolest aspects, it encourages nations to conduct regular AI impact assessments, like environmental impact reports, but for algorithms. The goal is to forecast social risks and make adjustments before harm occurs.
That's next level, an AI emissions test, in a sense.
Right. And in Canada, they've introduced the Algorithmic Impact Assessment AIA tool, which is mandatory for any federal agency using automated decision systems. It asks detailed questions about bias, transparency, and human oversight before any system can be deployed. It's helping build accountability into the government's use of AI from the very start.
So what we're seeing is a mosaic. Different countries, different strategies, but all moving toward the same goal. AI that's safe, fair, and accountable.
That's the future we're aiming for. And the beauty of AI ethics is that it's one of those rare places in tech where collaboration across borders really matters. No single country will get this right on its own. We've got to learn from each other and build something better, together.
Awesome. And to tie that into building something better for everybody, we're going to take a pause to hear from our sponsors. We'll catch you on the flip side.
Ever feel like your business decisions are made by throwing darts at a board? It's time to upgrade to a more precise approach. Enter AI Innovations Unleashed, your co-pilot in navigating the digital frontier. At AI Innovations Unleashed, we harness cutting-edge AI innovations, advanced data analytics, and strategic consulting to drive business transformation. Our mission is to empower your organization to thrive in the digital era and achieve a sustainable competitive advantage. NextWavyStrategies.com. Imagine having an AI assistant that doesn't just suggest your next binge watch, but propels your business into the future. That's what we offer. A partnership that turns complex data into clear strategies, and strategies into success. So, if you're ready to stop relying on gut feelings and start making informed choices, visit us at AIInnovationsunleashed.com. Let's make your business smarter, one algorithm at a time.
And welcome back. So far, we've talked about bias as a concept. We've defined the terms, explored the tech, and looked at policies trying to keep things fair. But let's bring this even closer to home. Because bias in AI isn't just something researchers debate in labs or governments write about in reports. It's already affecting real people in real ways.
Absolutely. I think sometimes folks hear AI bias and think it's a future problem. But it's not. It's happening now, and it's affecting things like healthcare, hiring, education, and law enforcement. These are the kinds of systems that shape our lives.
One example that really stayed with me comes from healthcare. Back in 2019, a widely used algorithm designed to help hospitals identify which patients should get extra care was found to be systemically underestimating the needs of Black patients. The algorithm used healthcare spending as a proxy for need, but because Black patients historically have less access to care and therefore spend less, the algorithm assumed they were healthier than they actually were. That's not just a math error, that's a life or death issue.
It really is. And the thing is, no one designed it to be racist. The bias wasn't in the intention, but in the data and the assumptions. That's what makes these cases so tricky, and why being neutral isn't good enough.
Another one that stands out is in education. During the pandemic of 2020, schools around the world started using remote proctoring tools, AI systems that monitor students during online exams. Sounds practical, right? But many of these tools use facial recognition or eye tracking, and students with darker skin tones found themselves flagged disproportionately for suspicious behavior because the system couldn't recognize their faces properly.
Exactly. There were students literally taking tests under bright lamps just to be seen by the software. Some were locked out of their exams altogether. It's stressful, humiliating, and fundamentally unfair, especially for students already navigating systemic barriers in education.
And then there's policing. Facial recognition systems have already led to multiple wrongful arrests in the United States, including the case of Robert Williams in Michigan, who was misidentified by a surveillance camera and arrested in front of his family for a crime he didn't commit, all based on faulty AI.
That story always hits hard, because again, it's not just about the tech getting something wrong, it's about who it gets wrong. These systems tend to make more mistakes with marginalized groups, which just reinforces existing inequalities.
And the impact ripples. If you're wrongly denied a loan, you might miss out on starting a business. If your resume never makes it past an automated screen, you may never get a foot in the door. These aren't bugs, they're biases built into the machine.
And they're reminders that every dataset comes with a history. Every decision has a context. That's why fixing AI bias isn't just about patching code. It's about rethinking power, access, and accountability.
And that's why we're having this conversation, to make the invisible visible, to remind people that when we say AI bias, we're not talking about a hypothetical future. We're talking about the present state.
And hopefully, a better future. One we can actually shape if we stay informed and demand fairness from our systems.
So we've talked a lot today about systems making decisions, hiring tools, healthcare triage algorithms, facial recognition. But what about the AI models we use every day? The ones writing blog posts, generating art, recommending news. These are all tools many of our listeners use at work, in school, and for fun. So, Casey, can generative AI be biased too?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, the bias in generative AI can be even more subtle, but no less impactful. These are the models that generate text, images, code, even music. Tools like GPT, DALL-E, Midjourney, they're trained on enormous datasets scraped from the internet. So guess what happens when the internet itself is biased?
I'm guessing that bias doesn't just disappear.
You got it. Let's take image generation as an example. If you ask a model like DALL-E to create an image of a CEO or a software engineer, you're more likely to get a white man in a suit than, say, a woman or a person of color. Why? Because that's what the training data, mostly drawn from online media, overrepresents.
So even though no one sat down and said, only show white guys as CEOs, the algorithm still learned to stereotype?
That's representation bias. And it doesn't just shape what the model outputs, it shapes how people using the model think about the world. If you're a kid using an AI to help with a school project, and it keeps showing doctors as men and nurses as women, that subtly reinforces outdated gender roles.
And this shows up in language models too, right? Like chatbots?
For sure. Language models like GPT learn patterns in human speech, but they also absorb our cultural biases. Studies have shown that LLMs trained on open web data reproduce stereotypes. For example, associating certain races with crime or certain genders with domestic roles.
That sounds uncomfortable and really dangerous.
It can be, even in cases where it's unintentional. These models don't mean to be biased. They're reflecting the data they're fed. That's why you'll hear terms like bias amplification, where the AI doesn't just reflect human bias, it makes it worse by repeating it at scale.
And I imagine the more people who use these tools for writing, hiring, education, the more that bias ripple spreads.
You nailed it. And we're already seeing that play out. Some hiring platforms now use generative AI to suggest candidate evaluations or compose rejection emails. If the language model encodes subtle bias, say, it's less enthusiastic about candidates from certain schools or backgrounds, that shapes real-life outcomes.
So, how do we fix that? Is there any hope of training these systems differently?
Yes, but it's hard work. One solution is fine-tuning these models with more representative, curated datasets. Another is building in bias detection tools, kind of like spell check, but for prejudice. OpenAI and other labs are also investing in alignment research, which basically means steering models to follow ethical and human-centered goals.
And what about transparency? Can people using these tools know where the data came from?
That's the dream. We're not quite there yet, but people are calling for more dataset documentation, what's sometimes called data nutrition labels. These would tell you where did the data come from, what kind of voices are represented, and who's missing from the conversation.
So, if I'm using a chatbot or an image generator or AI writing assistant, I should be aware that I'm not just talking to neutral technology. I'm talking to a system trained on a particular slice of human knowledge.
Exactly. And once you're aware of that, you can use the tool more critically. Question what it gives you. Add context. Don't assume it's unbiased just because it sounds smart or looks professional.
That's some powerful advice, not just for this episode, but as we head into next week's topic. Can AI be creative? If bias exists even in our imagination tools, we've got to think carefully about how we're shaping the stories and images of the future.
Well said, JR. It's not just about how AI reflects the world, it's about how it helps create the world. And that's where we all have a role to play.
Before we wrap up, let's get practical. What can you, as a listener, actually do about AI bias? You don't need to be a data scientist or a programmer to be part of the solution.
First, stay curious. Keep asking questions when you see or use AI in your daily life. Whether it's an online loan application, a chatbot, or a hiring platform, start by asking, who built this? Who trained it? And who might be left out of the data?
Second, demand transparency. If your company or school is using AI tools, ask how decisions are being made. Advocate for bias audits and fair practices. You don't need to know how to code to call for accountability.
And third, support organizations that are working to build better AI. Groups like the Algorithmic Justice League, Data and Society, and Black in AI are doing incredible work, researching, educating, and pushing the tech world to do better.
Because building fair AI isn't just a tech problem, it's a people problem. And people like you, tuning in, have more power than you might think. So today we unpacked one of the most important topics in AI, bias. We started by defining what bias means in an AI context, how it can come from flawed data, poor design, or unexamined assumptions.
Then we explored what bias looks like in the real world, from hiring discrimination to healthcare gaps to educational roadblocks. These aren't abstract issues. They're affecting people today in tangible ways.
We also dove into what's being done right now to fix these problems. Regulations like the EU AI Act, NYC's audit laws, and forward-thinking initiatives in India, Canada, and at UNESCO.
And we zoomed in on the tools we use every day, generative AI models like GPT and DALL-E, and how even creativity isn't immune to the biases baked into our data.
Which brings us perfectly into next week's episode, the final in our May I Learn About AI series. We're asking a question that gets to the heart of technology and imagination. Can AI be creative? From AI-generated music and paintings to co-written novels and synthetic voices, what does creativity look like when machines enter the studio?
As we said at the start, AI isn't magic. It's math trained on people. So if we want a future that's fair, imaginative, and inclusive, we have to make sure those people and their stories are represented.
So from this Mother's Day, a day rooted in care, fairness, and protection, we hope this conversation sparks reflection, not just about what AI can do, but about what it should do and who it should serve.
Thanks for spending this time with us. Let's keep learning, asking better questions, and building technology that reflects the best of who we are.
And that's a wrap on this episode of AI Innovations Unleashed, your weekly download on all things AI. If you enjoyed the conversation, make sure to subscribe so you're always synced up with the latest in artificial intelligence. We'd really appreciate a rating and review. It helps the algorithm help us reach more curious minds like yourself. Follow us on all of our social media platforms under the name AI Innovations Unleashed for updates, sneak peeks, and some bonus AI content every now and then that we couldn't quite fit into an episode. Got a question, topic, or a wild AI theory? Drop us a message. We might feature it on a future show. Until next time, stay curious and stay real with AI.